The National 12 is a two-person sailing dinghy with a UK racing heritage. The class was launched in 1936 with classic wooden clinker boats. The 12 is a development class, meaning the hull designs and rigs have evolved over time to keeping them current. Join us as we explore the history of the 12, how it has developed over the course of 10 decades into the lightweight, rewarding racing machine of today. The class was launched in 1936 as a lower-cost alternative to the International 14 to encourage people into the sport of dinghy racing. The announcement proclaimed that boats would not be one design, with the specific intent of encouraging innovation. A simple set of rules were listed to control the development of the class. Hulls must not exceed 12 feet in length. Hulls must not weigh less than 190 pounds, including floorboards. Hulls must be of clinker construction. Dinghies to carry no more than 90 square feet of sail. Spinnakers were not allowed. Finally, boats must not cost more than £45, though this rule didn't anticipate inflation. Uffa Fox was a preeminent designer of the times and was approached to draw up the lines for the first 12, the Uffa King. On the release of the design, Uffa Fox famously quoted, "I've put all I know into this design. It cannot be easily outclassed, and I doubt if it ever will be." Here is the first Uffa King N1 Gypsy sailing in the Solent. The following 10 decades of development, however, brought new materials for hulls, rigs and sails, and new knowledge in naval architecture that have enabled a fabulous evolution of the class. The first championship was held in Poole Harbour in the September of 1936. 40 National 12s took part. There was much to learn about sailing the 12-footers. There were many capsizes, near sinkings due to poor buoyancy, and a few rigs that came down. But that didn't stop a huge interest in the class, with a headline from the event in Yachting World saying that the occasion had proved that the Yacht Racing Association established National 12 class was full of life and vitality. Sir William Burton of the YRA, precursor of the RYA, had established the premier race of the event, the Sir William Burton Cup. This race then went on to give the name Burton Week to the National 12 Championships ever since. River racing was popular in 1937, as shown in these photos of the River Thames at Ranelagh SC and the River Trent at Trent Valley Sailing Club. The class was so popular that 191 boats were built in the first year alone. Booms were high on the reaches and runs, as the kicking strap had not been invented yet. By the start of the 1940s, 500 National 12s had been built. World War II, however, led to an understandable pause in production. After the war, designers started to explore both narrower and beamier hulls than the Uffa King. The narrower designs had the edge on the rivers, and the beamier designs showed their mettle in stronger winds and more open waters. The photo of this Mark II Sunshine here shows how much wider the boats were by the mid-40s in comparison to the Uffa King on the left. The clench laid rib and nail construction method continued to be used, as shown in these photos. Jack Holt started his 12 design career in the 1940s. The Holt 500 series hit the water in 1945 and were very successful all-rounders. This is a photo of Jack sailing his first Holt 500 Laughter. Rigs and foils didn't change much. Centreboards were steel, weighing in at a hefty 50 pounds. Rigs remained wooden, made from hollow spruce supported by galvanised wire shrouds, piano wire diamonds, very tuneful but needed replacing every season. Sails were made of cotton and had a tendency to shrink. The class had grown massively by the 50s, with the Torbay Burton Week shown here attracting the largest entry with over 180 boats. The shortage of good timber led to the class rules being changed to allow experimentation with metal masts. Ian Proctor was one of the first to make them work and formed a successful mast manufacturing company as a result. This is a photo of Ian inspecting one of his metal masts. Ian Proctor also made his mark with hull designs, from the Mark I to the Mark XIV. Proctor reduced the rocker and increased topside flare to make his designs beamier and better for planing, as ably demonstrated by the Proctor Mark IX in this photo. Amazingly, the 1936 Uffa King design was still being built well into the 50s, but the wider designs now clearly had the edge. Rigs and hull construction methods also saw significant improvements during this decade. Hull construction moved from clench-laid rib and nails to glued planks, and followed by even lighter plywood planking. This was first used on Proctor Mark II Witchcraft. The kicker was introduced, and the use of mast bend to control the sail shape started to be understood. Finally, self-bailers became the norm, a bonus as the beamier designs shipped water all the more readily. The 60s saw some big changes in the class. The new construction techniques and the move from steel centre plates to wood centreboards enabled a sizable reduction in weight from 300 to 200 pounds. Terraline sails were experimented with in the mid-50s. The stiffer cloth enabled a larger roach, a more powerful sail plan to be developed. This led to the introduction of sail measurement limits in 1959, which resulted in the distinctive National 12 sail plan as shown in this photo. Steadily during the 60s, the hull shapes changed to capitalise on the additional power, with even wider boats being created for more righting moment and faster planing hulls. Mike Jackson designed the March Hare in 1962. Mike gave her a fine bow and a faster planing hull. Here's a March Hare handling well in some pretty big seas, with Mike on this occasion crewing. The Mr. Jones design from the pen of Martin Jones was the most noticeable design of the 60s. Launched in 1967 and at 6 foot 2 inches wide, Mr. Jones was significantly wider than any other 12 of the time. Her extra power allowed her to clean up in the 1968 Burton Week. In the late 60s, Phil Morrison appeared on the design scene, releasing the China Doll in 1967. The Doll proved to be an excellent all-rounder. They were also the most popular design, with 162 built. The 7-plank construction of the China Doll is nicely shown in this photo. The China Doll dominated the early 1970s, but soon there was an explosion of hull construction methods which mixed things up. Clinker construction was now considered quite expensive and time-consuming. Glass-reinforced plastic was looming, and at the same time both glue and plywood were improving, enabling boats to be built with fewer planks. The class allowed rule changes to embrace both GRP and 4-plank construction. Impact N2512 was designed by Mike Jackson in 1970 as a prototype to demonstrate 4-plank construction. This photo shows how the 4 planks made for a smoother hull. At the same time as wood was developing down the 4-plank route, N2456 Mustang was built using a novel glass balsa wood sandwich technique. This created a light, stiff GRP hull. The construction method used on Mustang was then optimised with the paper dart, which was designed by Phil Morrison in 1972 as a ready-to-race GRP boat. The paper dart took many of the prizes in the early 70s. The other National 12 designers quickly shifted to 4-plank construction. Mike Jackson drew the lines of the Cheshire Cat 4-planker in 73, and they were successful in the mid-70s. This picture shows the very distinctive lines of the Cheshire Cat, with a wide transom and wide beam carried a long way aft. But even more changes were afoot, with 2 innovations still to come in the late 70s. The first was Bouncer, designed by Joe Richards. Bouncer sported a loose foot mainsail which improved the sail shape and allowed the rig to be powered up more downwind. She also had a daggerboard rather than traditional centreboard. Joe won the 1977 Burton Cup in Bouncer. The association membership subsequently decided to ban daggerboards due to concerns around the impact to river and lake sailing. The final big innovation of the decade was the 1-planker, designed by Joe Richards and Nigel Waller using beer mats and reportedly built in a single evening. Punkarella was built using a single sheet of plywood each side and had a particularly noticeable paint job. She was wide, flat and fast, winning the Burton Cup in '78 in the hands of Nigel Waller. Punkarella was winning again in '79, '81 and '82 with Graham Bailey at the helm. The new construction methods enabled a further reduction in weight from 200 pounds down to 176 pounds. The trend for increasingly wide hulls continued in the 80s, leading to the class rules to set a maximum width of 2 metres in 1980. The plywood one planker evolved into round-bilged hulls which dominated the 80s, initially with Mike Jackson's Tigris design, but soon joined by lots of other designs. This photo shows the River Trent at Trent Valley Sailing Club full of round-bilged designs. The Tigris was soon outclassed on open water by the baggy trousers designed by Rob Peebles. The baggy took the Punkarella concept further with a wider beam and flatter aft sections, giving even more power and planing potential. The baggy dominated Burton Week in the 80s, with an even more extreme Baggy 2 variant emerging. Phil Morrison introduced a competitive baggy with his Crusader design. This was another one planker, but a better all-rounder, having a more rocker, i.e. a deeper midsection than the baggy. Rig controls developed significantly in the 80s with easily controllable shrouds, jib forestay, kicker and mast ram, all adjustable by the helm or crew from the side deck. In the late 80s, Ullman Sails experimented with mylar sails. Ian Simpkins produced a powerful sail shape and used the mast bend, including pre-bend, to control and optimise the shape for upwind. These pictures show the progress of shroud tension controls from levers through muscle boxes to low-friction ball-bearing pulley cascade systems. Mast gained swinging spreaders which rotated to avoid pressing into and distorting the mainsail downwind. GRP boats made a comeback at the end of the 80s as Phil Morrison produced the Design 8. This was a glass, polyester resin, foam sandwich production boat ready to race. They were very popular and successful in the late 80s. Rob Peebles produced the most radical design of the decade in 1989. The soap dish N3321 was as close to self-draining as possible and constructed in carbon foam sandwich. She was stiff and super light. The design showed sporadic bursts of speed, but wasn't enough for an all-rounder to catch on. The self-draining concept, however, paved the way for the developments of the 90s. The final chapter was a radical departure from the designs of the time. Mike Jackson penned the lines in 1987, but it wasn't until the early 90s that the design showed its potential. The hull was deeper and narrower than its peers. It carried weight well and found its groove upwind nicely. The chapters dominated the early 90s. In 1995, the influence of the soap dish was finally felt. The class rules were changed to allow double-bottom boats, which were fully self-draining. This change had two impacts. Firstly, it meant the boats were not carrying around extra water, and secondly, it was possible to build lighter and stiffer boats as the floor created a strong box section. Around this time, carbon foam sandwich construction also gained popularity. It was quite expensive at first, but the material prices fell towards the end of the decade and the build technique was mastered. The final chapters were quick to adopt the use of carbon fibre and double bottoms. They also added some width at the transom, which kept them competitive. With the further changes in construction methods, the minimum weight was reduced to 78 kilograms by the year 2000. The minimum weight now also included the mast, making it an all-up weight. The Feeling Foolish design emerged in the late 90s to challenge the dominance of the chapter. This was Bim Darza's first National 12 design, and he immediately hit on a winner. The Foolish was a great all-rounder. She had low wetted area, allowing her to ghost along in the light stuff, yet the wide decks and planing area allowed her to perform well on open water. The flyaway jib pole was introduced in the mid-90s and caught on quickly. The pole allows the jib shape to be controlled on the reach, ensuring no power is lost. The photo on the left shows the poor jib shape without the pole. The top of the jib is twisting off and the bottom of the jib is too curved. The middle photo shows how the shape is improved by pulling on the pole. The right photo shows how this perfect shape can be maintained as the jib is eased for a broad reach. It also made goose winging easier, as the crew didn't need to balance and fumble around trying to attach the pole to the mast, whilst the bow of the boat was at risk of going underwater. The pace of development continued in the 2000s with the four designers competing. Bim Darza's Feeling Foolish dominated the early 2000s. He added evolutions of this design to his range with the Numinous and the maximum width Paradox. The final chapter also had a max width tweak, as shown here in Max Factor. Phil Morrison launched the Big Issue and Big Issue 2, which were built by Mike Cook's Aardvark Technologies. Gavin Willis created the most radical 12 to date with the Paradigm. More on her later. The concept was then packaged as a more moderate ready-to-race Paradigm 2 by Ronda Boats in 2009. At the end of the decade, Joe Richards returned to the class with the Dead Cat Bounce, a boat designed around the wing rudder. Joe also had a few innovations. The DCB was able to sail with the wings in place in all wind speeds. She had a trim tab centreboard to improve efficiency upwind. She supported a fathead mainsail, using the increased stiffness of the latest sailcloths to support a wider head and create more sail area. The Gavin Willis Paradigm design of late 2003 was truly a shift in thinking. It incorporated the following radical ideas. First, fully controllable wing rudder, bow flaps which could be lowered to deflect the bow wave, no hull skin at the bow to reduce wind resistance, an aerofoil foredeck to induce lift. Carbon masts and boom became mainstream, and the mainsail shape was adapted to the greater bend range they could offer, enabling a more powerful shape downwind and control of a flatter profile for upwind. The real value of the carbon mast was now understood to be the dynamic gust response. Losing power and regaining it quickly, the reduced mast weight turned out to be a secondary benefit. Rigs developed further in the 2000s. Mike Cook tried a canting rig on his Big Issue 2, Radical Edward, in 2004, the concept being to bring the whole rig to windward like a windsurfer, creating vertical lift and depowering at the same time as the wind increased. This ultimately didn't prove enough of an advantage and didn't catch on. Wing rudders started to show their potential. Wing rudders had been tried in the 90s, but were small and fixed. They didn't make a difference. In 2001, Tom Edom demonstrated his fluke wings on his older Crusader design. This was a big wing with an adjustable trailing edge. It showed bursts of speed on reaches in force 2 to 4. Tom's demonstrator encouraged others to experiment, but the narrow operating range meant that they didn't take off at the time. It was the Paradigm 2 in 2008 that first showed the potential with a large foil and a championship race win. The wing breakthrough was the Dead Cat Bounce in 2009, which was designed around the wing rudder. The boat was able to operate in all wind strengths with the wings in place. The class launched a national series in 2003 sponsored by Gill. The national series had between 8 and 10 events spread across the country and brought all the regional fleets together. The convincing DCB victory in the hands of Joe Richards in 2009 led to P&B creating a ready-to-race offering in 2010. The DCB dominated for the first part of the decade, but was challenged by the Dave Holland designed Hijack in 2012. The Hijack design had a V'd hull for fast planing, higher freeboard, and also supported a wing rudder. There was quite a lot of experimentation with wing designs this decade. There are a lot of factors to consider. Depth, how far the wings are positioned below the waterline. Wing location, front, middle or rear of the rudder blade. Amount of sweep, which makes the wings tolerant to steering movement. Amount of dihedral, how much the tips were above the horizontal, which adds stability. The profile, whether to have a high lift or low drag section, length and area. It was found that horizontal wings with no sweep or dihedral were quite aggressive. They could be fast but were not tolerant. The benefit of retrofitted wing rudders was spotted. It was found that wing rudders added new life to many older designs, including the final chapters and Feeling Foolishes, making older boats championship competitive machines. Gavin Willis designed the bendy boat in 2018. His concept was to change the shape of the hull accordingly to the conditions and points of sailing. The hull could be given more rocker for light winds and upwind sailing, and a flutter hull for planing conditions and reaches. Gavin's experiment showed occasional bursts of speed. However, the manufacturing challenges combined with safety concerns led to the class voting to disallow bendy boats in the future. Gull sponsored the national series from 2013, with Dinghy Shack sponsoring the series from 2020. Construction methods had by 2000 brought the minimum weight to 78 kilograms, including the mast. This chart plots the progress of reductions in actual build weight and the corresponding changes in class minimum weight. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the development of the National 12 interesting. There are more videos on the website. If you fancy trying a 12, then head to the website and the free trial page.